Today we are going to attempt to turn this old, well-loved and beaten down Hive box into a Ross round box. This here is a well-loved medium box. It was donated by a fellow that donated about 20 boxes to us. They were sitting outside on a pallet covered up for over 20 years. They had a giant dead wasp nest in it, which I'll include a photo at the end of the video so you can see that. That was a first. But it's a really unique box. You can see that it has the metal brackets on here, and it has 9 of them, so you can fit 9 frames into this. And you'll find, especially with equipment used by older beekeepers, a lot of them in their honey boxes, they wanted 9 frames that were spaced out evenly. That way they would have thicker comb. That way the whole harvest process was much easier. I heard growing up that doing that method would render even more honey than 10 frames. I don't know how true that is and what empirical evidence there is to argue that. But what is obviously true is that, yeah, it is easier to harvest from. Look at all the wax moth scarring on the side of this box. And you can see that at one point he patched this. This has a strip right here, and there's no wood filler in between, which we can change that if we need. But most of the rot is on the bottom. You can see here, a little bit here, this corner. See the bottom, I used tape in a previous season with this honey box on top to kind of seal it onto the hive a little bit better because the gap was just too much. A little bit of rotten holes is great for ventilation, but that was not the case here. So when we do trim the box today, we're going to trim the bottom off because that's the most rotten part. Also be tackling this break out of the box right here, which we really don't need to do, because if I turn this into a Ross round, this can be just a little second entrance up top. That's not a big deal, but I'm pretty sure we could fix this part too, and that would probably make the box a little bit more solid and sturdy, and I would hate for it to start rotting here in the corner. So our goal today is to have it hold Ross round frames and not have a significant gap under. I did at one time think that, oh, you just get a shallow box and that fits these. No, a shallow box is still too tall. The boxes for these are 4.5 inches tall, and there aren't exactly plans for them online. And it looks like you can't just buy the boxes. I've contacted the Ross Round Company, and they have not responded. Normally they only take wholesale orders, but I contacted them and said, hey, I got frames but no box, and they can't even refer me to a distributor, unfortunately. So today we are going to attempt to do this. This may turn out real bad for us. I may mess this up, and regardless, I'm going to post the video anyway so you can learn from what I did here. Now you may say, hey man, why don't you just go get some lumber and make a new box? That would probably be easier than modifying an old one into that. And you know, you would be right. You would definitely be right on that. It would probably be an easier way to do it. But I like recycling some of these old boxes, and I want to see how good, bad, or ugly it turns out to be. So, as we said before, we're going to cut off the bottom of the box. So what we're first going to want to do is grab a square and measure 4.5 from the top down. So I have my trusty pencil and my square, and we're going to get it to 4.5 inches down from the top, which would be right about here. We got our 2 points, and I know you can't quite see very well, but I'm just going to connect these and make one long straight line. And our tool of choice for this is going to be a circular saw. You may say, hey, a table saw would work better and be more accurate. You are completely right. I don't have one. So we're going to use that particular tool to do this. Before we do this, we have our line. It gives us 4.5 inches to make our box. And that gap that he has for this patch that he did more than 20 years ago, it is definitely going to need some wood filler or something to stuff it. There's a part of me, because of the gap over here, that thinks, you know, maybe I should redo the patch. But honestly, it's good sturdy wood. It's not rotten. Why break it if it's something I could just use a little wood filler on? Here goes nothing. I only get one shot at this, so let's hope for the best. We've almost freed it, as you can see. Alright, now let's pop this off, and here we are. Looks like we have a little bit of a mistake here in the corner. I'm going to measure and see if we can flatten out this gap right here, because there's a little bit of one. Alright, and there we are. We now have a box that's the proper height, and on top of it, it's a pretty clean cut. Could be a little bit better, but it's pretty clean. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to fix that gap on the box, and what we need to do is make wood filler for that. Let's mix it up. Add some wood glue there, and that should be enough. When I make wood filler, I go for the consistency of peanut butter. Makes it easier to work with, dries fast enough. I would argue that's probably what you're working to get. There we go. We have it pretty well sealed, and I'm pretty happy with that. We have to make sure that we do the other side too, because a gap in here that's significant enough, hive beetles will climb in that and hide out, and we do not want that. I was going to remove the metal brackets, but I'm finding that the nails for these things will tear the sides off the box. I tried jimmying them a little bit, and it's not that it's rotten, it's just those nails are well in there. You see, there is a significant gap right in between here, and I'm going to have to fill that gap so that we can get frames in here. And I'm going to see if I can reuse some of the old hive pieces that we cut off for that. What we have to do is this diagonal cut out of here, we need to make it a more straight cut like this. That way I can just put a piece in here and we're good. Here we go. My preferred tool is this one, the jigsaw. Now when I cut any type of patch, I use the hole itself to tell me where to do it, so I'll trace a stencil with it. I can't really show you from this angle, but I'm more or less going to put it into there and trace what I need. I have my patch right here, and I'm going to cut it out with a jigsaw real quick. Our patch here, and once again, it doesn't really have to be perfect and fitting. It just has to be close enough to where we could plane it down. But it's in a great position, really. It needs a tiny bit of wood filler right there, but aside from that, it's in great shape. Put a little bit of wood glue in. Now the trick with wood glue is only apply just enough, because if you put too much, it'll just bond to itself. And that's no good. I actually put a little bit of wood filler in the tiny bit of a gap, and now we're going to pound it back on, get to where it meets. There we go. Wow, it's remarkably flush. This is where I think I could get myself into some trouble. This is such a thin wall that I might want to actually drill pilot holes for the nails. If I had staples or nails for my nail gun, that would be the best thing to use on something that thin. I'm going to try nails on here. It may fail. We'll see. Well, here goes nothing. Large gap is done now. I could patch right here, and I'm thinking about it, but it's not going to be that big of a hole, and having it on there isn't a big deal. Little holes aren't a big deal. It's the large ones that can be a problem. Well, that was a good find. The Hive sides are about 3/4 of an inch, and one on each side fits perfectly, really. So if I can find a board that is about that thickness, I can put one on each end and box this in, and then I can put one on the side here, which would then have a spring and push on it. I got this fence post here that was from my fence that I just tore down, and we can recycle this. It is the right thickness here. It isn't exactly the right amount of wide, because this is only 3 3/4 when we would want it to be 4, but we can have a little bit of extra space in the bottom. We might see a little bit of burr comb, but we'll be creative in how we do this, and we'll see what strips are left over, and maybe we can even make sure there isn't that much of a gap. Yeah? Our goal is to get the nails out of this board. That way we can work with it. Fun fact, I really love these fence post boards because they're the right thickness of a Hive box, and they're really good for making spacer boards. If you need to have like winter feed in the top, or you use dry sugar method, or you want to put fondant in top. I'm often too lazy to measure, so I really just mark what I need and cut the piece and hope for the best. Here we go. Alright, let's make our first cut and see how this plays out. Alright, not bad. There is a gap on the bottom I don't like, and we're going to try to solve that problem when we get there, but this provides the right thickness to where if I put one on the other end, it'll work. So we're going to trace this piece, make a second one, and install them into the box. So our goal here is to use these short screws. They get enough bite into the back here, and we're going to use quite a few of them. I could use wood glue in between. I don't feel a need to do that, and I would like to be able to pull these off if something doesn't work out. So that's what we're going to do today. Nice. I'm going to put this in the other side and make sure it's exactly the height we need it, right there. Right to where it's just... Alright, we'll put a few more screws in. We have the one on the bottom now, and I'm just reusing some of the nail holes in it. I am starting to see something though. This is an image of what the edge looks like on a Ross round on the very end. And initially I thought, okay, I guess they just don't want to use thick lumber as that costs more money. No, I see there is a rhyme and reason for it, using a thin piece of plywood and having that ability for the bees to climb up through there. It's just another route. I don't think it's necessary for the box to function, but I can definitely see, yeah, that is there for a purpose. We're cutting the third and final piece. It's a board that presses horizontally toward the frames. It keeps them nice and compact. That goes back 150 years to the split comb systems that inspired the modern day comb systems. You want to put a couple tension springs in the corner behind the board to make sure that it butts up against it. I can recycle some springs I have for that. If I didn't have that, I could probably use a couple little wooden wedges that I could force in there, some shims. we are successful, that we can have frames on both sides. It's square, they can slide easily. That's in good shape. We also have our third piece we just cut, which will compress those once we put the springs in between the wall and there. The only thing I'm really concerned about is down here. We have this gap. That is a significant gap along the board right here. That's going to make space in between the top of the frames on the one below this. And I'm debating cutting something for it. It's such a small space that with the frames resting properly, you're only going to have that. So is it really that big a deal to have it there? I think I'm going to leave it for now. Or at the very least, I'm going to look and see what my options might be. Because it's just narrow enough to where I don't think I'm going to find a piece of standard lumber that fits there. Well, I'm going to have to rip a board. So we're going to leave that. That's fine. And we're going to load up these frames, put them in, and drop a few springs in. And I think at the end of that, we have a Ross Round kit. This is a Ross Round frame. Now, this is really ingenious in how it's designed. And I have a video that I did recently that goes over the different systems and shows them. More or less, you open one of the frames up, you take the rings. Each one of these is going to have 2 rings in it, and these fitted together or where you're going to put the end labels, and they're going to make the comb in between. When you do this, remember this, the rings only go one way, so this little notch has to go downward into facing the frame because it only rests one way. We have each prepped on both sides. They have a ring. We take a piece of shallow foundation. Fun fact, this foundation is from the 1970s. It was in a box in somebody's barn wrapped in wax paper, and then you just clip it together. And now you have a Ross Round frame. Quick pro tip, you can see they stored this one with fresh rings. That's a good thing. You should do that. Every year when you harvest these, you should put the rings back in, maybe even the foundation, and then put it into storage. I know in spring I have no time for anything. At the very least, make this a winter ritual or something along those lines, because you just don't have the time during beekeeping season if you keep more than 5-6 hives. One thing I didn't get to point out in my last video is after you harvest the Ross Rounds, you're going to have this wax left over that is in between each circle. And sometimes you'll even pull wax molds out of there because the bees just don't have access to it. But I always make sure to tear those sheets off and harvest them and throw them in. That way I can preserve that, melt it down, and reuse it for something else. It reduces waste. The convenient thing is too, let's say they only did 3 of these and there was 1 left over. By all means, just cut it and put part of a new sheet on there. Sometimes when I had like 3 that weren't done and 1 was filled in, I just split a sheet and put other pieces in there. So long as there's foundation, you're good. It doesn't have to be fancy or look fancy. It just has to work. That is a conundrum. And maybe this is where I messed up, and I'm not sure if it's something that's going to actually bother. When you have a Ross Round box, it has 8 frames in it. I fit 9, and they fit perfectly to where I don't need that additional board. If I needed that additional board that would rest on the bottom here, I'd have the springs behind it and it would be pushing up. No, 9 frames fit perfectly in here. Here's the bottom. My main issue is these little gaps right here. And you know, we could fill them in with something, but we're just not going to. The bees have access to this gap, and that's a good thing because hive beetles won't be able to hide out and live in there away from the bees. We have all these loaded up, and all this box could really use is really a paint job, and it would be ready to go. So I'll probably pull the frames when I paint it, give it a good paint job, and it'll be ready. Now, let's say that we went in with the board and used the spring. We would put the board right here, take one of these compression springs, pop it in there, and then it would hold. But there's a little bit of a gap, unfortunately. There's not enough space for this guy to work effectively. So we're going to try this. Bend it a little bit. And pop it in there. And there we go. So this is how at least the Ross round will come to you and is supposed to work. But we can fit an additional frame in there, and that makes me wonder why didn't they do an additional frame if they can fit? I wonder if Mr. Ross took that to his grave, or if it was a way where they didn't have to do another frame, because I imagine most of the money is in the plastic frames. That's my guess. I don't think they're trying to short anybody, but there probably was a good reason he engineered it that way. To be frank, that is how all other comb systems work. The hog half comb has this gap, the split comb system has it. So I couldn't tell you why they did it. But at least with this one, I could fit a 9th frame. And that is 4 additional Ross rounds. And at $15 to $20 a piece, that adds up pretty quickly. That could be as much as $80. So this is my Ross round conversion. It'll get a paint job. I'm proud of it. I appreciate you joining me for this experiment. I have quite a few frames left, enough to make 3 additional boxes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick my rotten mediums and shallows in the future, and the ones I retire, I'm going to do something like this.